Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here today. This is indeed a really very special occasion for me, as doing any program at this museum means the world to me. And I really want to show my gratitude to Evelio Acevedo and Guillermo Solana, who have made this relationship possible. And I'm looking at my team, Simone and Juan and Luis and everybody that comes on behalf of TBA21. And I look at everybody from Letizia and, Soledad as well, but who are part of the Thyssen Museum. And we used to be two teams. And I really feel that this time we can call ourselves one team, if I may. So just on this moment, I do want to a little bit introduce to some of you. I see a lot of new faces in here today. And to go a little bit back into TBA21 and how it was founded in 2002 with the dream of having a unique art collection. And the only way to really get there, I understood, after even only the first 2 years, was to do commissions. And working with artists has indeed been the greatest joy and privilege and learning experience that I could possibly have dreamt of. It has changed me entirely as a human being. My values and everything that I believe in today has shifted dramatically in these last 20 years. And it is really thanks to this opportunity of learning through these incredible projects and the intimacy of the work and understanding the creative process whilst trying not to interfere with it has been an incredible lesson. I'm really very touched by the fact that Joan has accepted to work with us for so many years, because this has indeed been a long process. But it was initiated by the TBA21 Academy, which is an offshoot of TBA21. It is a different organization. It's a different beast altogether. First of all, it is dedicated exclusively to projects that celebrate the ocean, that focus on the ocean, not only the disasters of the ocean, but also the dreams and hopes and the poetry of the ocean, just to help people and all of us understand the incredible importance that the ocean has in our life, in our environment, in our ecology, and in the sustainability of this planet. The Academy really was initiated in 2011. It was co-founded by myself and its director, Marcus Raymond, who's here today. And our idea was to create a huge collaboration amongst disciplines, but through the lens of art, working with artists as the center of this program, but looking at ocean sciences together, ocean conservation, policy making, and education, all of that whilst creating these incredible works, and this commission in particular, has gone through many iterations since 2016, when the first time it was shown, there was a performance that Joan gave in the square, Vasco da Gama Square in Kochi during the Kochi Biennial, where as the Academy, they were participating, organizing one of their convenings that was at the time led by the wonderful Uta Meta-Bauer together with Stefanie Hessler, who actually organized that program intimately and brought Joan into this mix. And from that very public square in Vasco da Gama in 2016 to be day after tomorrow performing this in what I know is Joan's favorite museum in the world, the Prado. And I say that with humility because I'm trying to convince her to change that to the Thyssen Museum being her favorite. But I know how excited she was when she heard that this was a possibility. So we're also very, very grateful to the Prado for having made this performance in a couple of days possible. And what we try to do at the Academy is to give artists this immersive experience so that that experience can be shared by all of us. And it is in order to come closer to the ocean and all the species that inhabit her, which has really been the focus of this incredible piece, as Joan will talk to you again in a moment. But it was the inaugural exhibition at the Ocean Space in Venice, a wonderful church of San Lorenzo that has been transformed by this exhibition and hopefully will be able to open with the shutdown in Venice, we're not sure. But in March, coming up, a new exhibition called from Curatorial Agency. So these incredible dedications to the ocean marks next year's UN Decade of Ocean Science. We have decided that this year's program would be entirely dedicated to the ocean, and I'm especially proud that they're both women artists, which are not being shown enough in Madrid, and I really appreciate Guillermo Solana's desire to bring more women artists to this museum and let us be the leading example in that looking forward. And before I leave, I want to say real personal thanks to Stefanie and to Joan for making this experience for me so incredible. And I've learned so much from watching you and being able to be in the sidelines. Thank you so much. And Guillermo, if you don't mind to come up and...
Hoy hemos cambiado los papeles. Francesca ha introducido todo y yo me voy a limitar a presentar a nuestras intervinientes de hoy, a las que van a mantener la conversación. La exposición que inauguramos hoy es una gran alegría y un gran privilegio para el museo, porque Joan Jonas es una gran maestra en los manuales figura como una gran maestra de la performance, la instalación y el vídeo, de los medios del arte de nuestro tiempo. Pero para mí es sobre todo una especie de figura chamánica, una maga, que se comunica, actúa de mediadora con todas las criaturas vivas del planeta y en particular, en esta exposición, con esa gran criatura viva que es el propio océano. Moving Off the Land, que es el título de la exposición, Moving Off the Land 2, significa hacerse a la mar, pero significa, como nos ha explicado esta mañana Marcus, abandonar nuestra mentalidad terracéntrica, abandonar nuestra mentalidad, digamos, limitada por nuestra vida en la Tierra y abrirse a los océanos, que son las 2/3 partes del planeta, como también nos explicaba esta mañana Marcus, el 80% de los cuales están todavía inexplorados y sin mapear, ¿no? Nosotros venimos de allí, toda la vida de la Tierra procede de allí y, sin embargo, hemos llegado al extremo de ponerla en peligro, se encuentra en peligro ahora. Una fundación como TBA21 Academy, que está dedicada en exclusiva a la investigación, al estudio y al rescate de los océanos, ha sido la que tenía que encargar esta pieza o esta serie de piezas, esta exposición a Joan Jonas, en un largo proceso de elaboración conjunta, como ha explicado Francesca, de lo que fue primero una performance y luego ha terminado convirtiéndose en un proyecto mucho más ambicioso. El año pasado en Venecia, con ocasión de la Bienal, como también ha mencionado Francesca, tuvo lugar una versión anterior a esta, de esta exposición, en la iglesia de San Lorenzo. Y bueno, es un espacio fabuloso de una iglesia muy antigua en restauración. Y había dudas sobre cómo íbamos a poder adaptarla a nuestro muy modesto y muy restringido espacio aquí, ¿no? Yo creo que al final ha funcionado muy bien, gracias a todo el equipo de TBA21 y del museo que ha trabajado en ello, a comisarios, arquitectas, coordinadores. hemos conseguido una presentación muy íntima del trabajo de Joan Jonas. Primero, esa magnífica pieza sonora donde, con material cedido a Joan por el biólogo marino David Gruber, ella elaboró esta pieza sobre el canto más sonoro, iba a decir de la tierra, el canto más sonoro del océano, que es el de las ballenas. Tenemos también aquí los dibujos originales, las maravillosas acuarelas que no se vieron en Venecia y que tienen una sala pequeña que les recomiendo muy especialmente, con todo un despliegue de la fauna marina, ¿no? Una vez Joan declaró que dibujar era para ella una de las cosas más importantes de su vida. En cada performance de Joan, como la que vamos a ver pasado mañana en el Museo del Prado y a la que también ha aludido Francesca, el dibujo está presente, ¿no? Y el corazón de la exposición quizá está en esa sala donde están los pequeños teatros con los vídeos, las filmaciones de los vídeos que combinan muy diversos materiales, combinan la propia investigación personal de Joan Jonas a lo largo de mucho tiempo, sus visitas a los acuarios de muchos lugares del mundo, su empatía con las criaturas del mar, de la que nos ha hablado esta mañana, esa especie de sintonía intuitiva en la que ella entra con las criaturas marinas, y luego filmaciones de carácter científico, de valor científico, del biólogo marino al que ya he citado, David Gruber, y hasta filmaciones hechas por la propia Francesca, filmaciones subacuáticas de la propia Francesca en aguas de Jamaica, yo creo, ¿no? Todo ese material combinado con lecturas de niños y adolescentes leyendo a clásicos como Dickinson o Melville componen un mosaico fascinante, una especie de puzzle para entender desde el mito, desde la literatura, pero también desde la ciencia y de la experiencia del arte, lo que los océanos son y lo que pueden ser para nosotros, ¿no? Joan va a conversar con su comisaria, la comisaria de esta exposición, Stefanie Hessler, que es una curator, autora y editora, que desde 2019, desde el año pasado, es además directora de la Kunsthalle de Trondheim, en Noruega. El año pasado ya fue comisaria de nuestra exposición de Dominique González Förster y Tomás Saraceno, Más que humanas. Ha comisariado esta exposición de Joan Jonas en Venecia el año pasado, que ya he citado, y ha escrito sobre los océanos en relación con el pensamiento y el arte contemporáneo en varias ocasiones. Por ejemplo, hizo una exposición en TBA21 en Viena titulada Dialectics, que luego ha dado lugar a un libro, Dialectics, publicado por el MIT, por el MIT, que se subtitula Imaginar una concepción del mundo oceánica a través del arte y la ciencia. Bueno, quiero agradecer a todo el equipo de TBA21 que ha encargado y ha producido esta exposición, su maravilloso trabajo. Empezando por Francesca, la propia Francesca, que es la impulsora de todo este proyecto, a Marcus Reimann como director de TBA21 Academy, a Stefanie, a Soledad Gutiérrez, que ha actuado también como comisaria enlace con el museo, y a Leticia de Cos, nuestra propia coordinadora desde el Museo de la Exposición, así como a la Fundación Ecolec, que colabora por tercera vez con uno de estos proyectos, y, por supuesto, y por encima de todo, a la propia Joan Jonas. Les dejo ya con ellas. Un aplauso, por favor, para ellas.
Thank you so much, Guillermo, Francesca, and the entire teams of both institutions, the Museo Nacional Thyssen-Bornemisza and TBA21, as well as TBA21 Academy, of course. Thank you, Joan, for having this dialogue since 2016 now. Thanks to Ute Metabauer, who introduced us. and to the fantastic team who made all of this possible. I mean, you've all been mentioned, but also I wanted to say thanks to Carlos Uros, who's been really wonderful in the background, and Simone Senta, Leticia de Cos, Soledad Gutierrez, and also Joan's studio, Sekina Gavagan, David Sherman, who are here, and Francesco Migliaccio, whom we'll see perform with you on Wednesday. I think some of you have seen the exhibition already, and if not, you'll get a chance to see it after our talk here. So we decided not to show any images, because I think the magic of what the exhibition does when you experience this doesn't really translate to images. But I thought we could talk about the inspiration, or the work that has led to the exhibition. And I wanted to start, Joan, by asking you about your experience with the ocean. I know you grew up partly in New Hampshire, close to the ocean, and you've been spending many summers in Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. And perhaps you can talk about this very personal experience and how your own relation to the ocean.
Well, actually, I grew up in New York.
Well, yeah. Which is also by the ocean.
But we went to New Hampshire, to the mountains, in the White Mountains every summer. So I grew up in nature, and I loved to be by myself in the woods. I was really, there weren't other children often. And so I spent a lot of time by myself in the woods. And we had the forest right behind the house in New Hampshire. It was very beautiful. And then I do go to Nova Scotia. I also went from the very early age, loved the beach, loved swimming, and so on. And in Nova Scotia, I'm right on the sea. And it's part of my life and part of my imagery, nature, period. And also, I have to say that, And so, how did I begin this interest in oceans? Well, I think it all began with Halldór Laxness, the Icelandic writer who wrote a book called Under the Glacier. And when I based a whole piece on that called Reanimation. The word glacier was in the title. I immediately thought, this was written in the 60s, glaciers are melting. So the work became about considering what's happening with the climate. And then, commissioned to do a piece for Venice, I was led by Halldór Laxness, actually, who writes beautifully and poetically about nature. So he had a particular quote about bees that led me in Venice to have a room of bees, and then also a room about fish. And so, also I went to Japan quite often, and once on the way, about 6 or 8 years ago, on the way to Japan, I thought, the Japanese eat a lot of fish. So I decided to make 100 drawings of fish with ink, and working with a Japanese book of fish. And that's when I began to consider fish, to look at them, to draw them. And the piece in Venice was about, part of it will be in those of you who can come to the performance, you'll see a little snippet of that. But that's how this whole, and I think Uta, who first invited me when she was working with TBA21, knew about this piece, and actually the curator in Venice. And then I met Stefanie after that, after we began, but Uta invited me. I also want to say thank you to TBA21 and to all the team. They were incredible. They're all really nice, wonderful people.
Mm-hmm. And for the work that you will see in the exhibition, as well as for the performance, you did research in aquariums as well, and off the coast of Jamaica. And so I wanted to talk to you about the research of actually looking at fish, both in aquariums behind glass, but also in the water.
Well, the first aquariums that I recorded were in Norway, actually, when I was working on reanimation. Norway, in the Lofoten Islands, where I was recording the mountains, has this one aquarium that's just about the local fish. And that was one of my favorite aquariums. It doesn't have any music, no fake plants, but the fish, just the local fish. And I never tire of looking at those fish. They're in this piece as well, trout and salmon. And then from then, when I take my camera everywhere, every time I went to a different city, I visited the aquariums. And so the footage is just filmed in different aquariums all over, wherever I could find an aquarium. And there are aquariums that are wonderful and aquariums that aren't so wonderful in the world.
There's something quite special in the video of the beluga whale in the exhibition, where this whale seems to be making contact with a little girl standing in front of the glass. And this particular scene is so fantastic because it really shows the relation between humans and other animals, and this kind of communication that we do not expect as much perhaps with fish or, aquatic mammals.
Well, once you start doing research about this subject, especially lately in the past 10 years, much more information has come out about how fish are really sentient beings. They think, they feel, they, like as Sylvia Earle said, and also I read about, somebody else said, they like to be petted. And I felt a real communion with fish in the aquariums. Many of them come and look at you when you're standing there with your camera, and you feel, it's a little bit like a zoo, but it's not quite as sad as a zoo, because the fish are at least in their medium. But the beluga whale, I went there with David Gruber. We were going there to visit another octopus, which octopus is a fantastic creature. The Soul of the Octopus is a book I read about a woman who worked with the octopus in the Boston Aquarium. So they're very intelligent and amazing creatures. And we walked into this aquarium, Mystic, Connecticut, and there was this beluga whale. It was very touching, and it's also sad, I have to say. The beluga whale is trying to communicate, and there's a child in front, which I included, going like this, and the beluga whale comes up and opens its mouth and makes a little noise. So it's a very mixed feeling one has in front of these creatures when you come across them in aquariums.
In the viewing boxes that you will see in the exhibition, there's really this moment where an encounter takes place. And I think when we consider interspecies relations and communications, this can really help us to understand, as you say, that fish are sentient beings, but also that creatures that are so very different from ourselves, that live in an aquatic environment, that breathe differently than ourselves, that don't have a centralized brain or heart, like the octopus, for instance, that they still have consciousness and intelligence not only being cognitive, but also emotional and so on.
Yeah, well, octopus, they're very mischievous, too. Yeah. They like to play tricks on the people who are keeping them, and they notice people. They noticed who's there, I visited the backstage in Boston, the octopus. So the octopus knows the attendant, and I didn't dare put my arms in the water because I had my camera, but there's stories about how they relate, and they like to squirt certain people that they don't like, So they really, people who work with octopus really develop a relation, and they don't live very long, sadly. They only live for 4 or 5 years, but they're...
That was so fascinating in a book that you mentioned by Sy Montgomery, The Soul of an Octopus, because she really describes developing a personal relationship with this particular octopus, Octavia, that you also mention in the piece. And I find it really fascinating what literature can do on the one hand, but on the other hand, you do something quite different, where you go beyond the descriptive or beyond what you can do through literature and through text, but you use so many different media. I mean, you use text and language, but you also use video, and you layer the different materials. So there's a certain depth that is being developed in the work.
Yeah, well, I perform in the projections of the fish, and I also stand next to them and speak about them. But in this case, I've done that for years, performed in the projections, but not with live beings. And so that's really had an effect on me, I have to say. I feel very tender toward the fish, and I'm never, as I said, I'm never tired of watching them, even the plainest fish, a salmon or a trout. And I perform with the octopus in front of the octopus. And I really think, I have to go back and visit the octopus in Boston again to say hello to it. But I'm beginning to work with a dancer, Eiko, and she loves the octopus too. So it's this way I'm working now, which is in the last 4 or 5 years, is a new experience for me in relation to creatures, because it's not like working with a dog. A dog, you have you're not in the same medium, but you're relating to them. But with the fish, you're swimming with them. It's different. I mean, virtually, not really.
Well, and also real. I mean, there are some shots also in the piece where you're swimming in Jamaica and you're yourself also in the work seen in the environment of the fish. That brings me to mirrors, which are an important element of your work, and you've done performances in the 1960s, Mirror Piece, for example, and in those pieces, the mirror acts as a device to include the audience or the onlooker in the work as well. So there's not really a separation possible between you as a viewer and the work. You're somewhat in it. So there's this layering, again, that is also happening in the videos and in the performances. Can you say something about the mirrors here?
Well, the mirror was my first prop that I ever used. When I began making performances, I am a visual artist primarily, but I was working with sculpture and I wasn't happy with it. So when I began to think about what do I do for a performance, I was influenced by the writing of Borges, who writes his book Labyrinths, and he mentions mirrors. And I was very intrigued, because literature is very much of an inspiration to me. I was intrigued with the way he described mirrors, and also the multiple universe and the reflection of mirrors in hallways and houses, and how it multiplies men, which he says is abominable, by the way. And so I took the mirror and I memorized all these quotes by Borges and did a performance. That was my first performance with mirrors. And then I made a piece where 17 people carried mirrors. And so I was very interested in how mirrors altered the space. And for instance, of course, there are many museums I love. The Prado has some of the great masterpieces. But how painters deal with the flat space of the canvas, how they create space behind that flat space is what happens with the mirrors in a space. They create another space by reflecting and breaking up the space and reflecting the audience, bringing the audience into the picture. And in that sense, mirrors have a certain power to make you uneasy because people don't like other people to see them looking at themselves in mirrors. So all that interests me about mirrors. They have many different dimensions. And I included them here because when I was invited to show this work or to develop it for Venice, I did the same thing the last time I was there. Naturally, you think about glass and water again. And so that's why I included mirrors that were made in Venice. The mirrors reflect the videos and the audience. And the other purpose of mirrors lately has been, this is about fish and about the oceans, but then the audience sees themselves, so it's about us also.
Yeah, you can't really separate those two, and that's also why Borges refers to the mirrors as a horror experience, basically in the text. For him, it's kind of this uncanny moment of seeing yourself. And it's also connected to technology, and we spoke about your use of technology before.
Well, when I was working with mirrors in the 60s, then the next step, obviously, were many artists bought video cameras and started working. Namjoon was the first, and then in 1970, I went to Japan and bought a video camera. And the video camera I considered another kind of mirror, so I referred to the monitor as an ongoing mirror, because the first thing we did as artists was sit in front of the monitor and see ourselves simultaneously with a live video camera. And that was a very unusual experience. It's hard to imagine now, but then it was a radical experience. And so I began to work with a video, which began to continue the idea of layering and making a more complicated picture, image, and concept.
Mm-hmm. And that's also something that is, again, happening in the exhibition, where you see how different technologies are changing the image, for example. And it reminds me of a conversation that we've had with Sylvia Earle, the marine biologist, who was one of the people developing also a lot of technologies to be able to explore the oceans further. And there's something with technology of how it enables us to see or to learn something, but also there are certain limitations to it. So I'm thinking that, what's the difference between a video, for example, or the performance? And through technology, of course, we can, in a certain way, dive deeper and we can explore the ocean. There's also exploitation connected to it, but it's not the same thing as the actual physical experience. And there's also a certain, to me, there's a certain difference between seeing the exhibition here, but then also the intensity of the performance, of course, even if you use video and layering in that too.
Well, when you see a live person, it's different. when you see a performance, a theater piece, it's very different from seeing something on video. And I have to say, in relation to some things I've been talking about with actually Chus, that I'm never in a trance when I perform. And maybe a long time ago when I first began to work, never in a trance, I have to say. But I've always done research about other cultures. When I began doing performances, I did a lot of research and went to see different ceremonies and the Tibetans. I went to the Southwest and saw Native American. I never quoted any of those things. And then the sound is another very affecting. The Tibetans have these horns, and the sound vibrates in your body and really alters your feeling of where you are. So it's my experience as a performer and as doing something live, it's very concrete. One has to concentrate on very particular concrete things, timing, exact timing, and also how you put the thing together. So it's a very clear and rational experience. Mm-hmm. But maybe the effect, there's a different kind of effect that the audience feels. But I have to say, this piece, I've never felt this before. Performing with the fish, there's a part I do where I run with, the seals are swimming back and forth, and running with them. But the seals I don't really relate to psychically as much as to some of the other fish. But after I do this performance a number of times, and it just gradually happened over the years, I have a different feeling of a relationship to these fish that I've recorded, especially the octopus, but I've never had that feeling before. So that's a very different feeling. And also, I think it was great to work with David Gruber, the marine biologist, who, these people also have this feeling. They swim with the fish and they dive. He's done amazing deep dives and seen these amazing creatures that none of us will ever see. This is all a very miraculous world. And that's the word I would use in relation to my wanting to show to the audience the miraculous quality, not the tragedy, it is a tragedy, but not the tragedy, not the fact that plastic is all over the place, because we know that. I think everybody in this audience knows that. But the miraculous beauty of underwater, of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's also, you're almost inventing rituals for underwater creatures or for the ocean. And we were talking about rituals before, and you said that you don't really enter trance while you perform, but there is a certain element of rituals, and culturally, the reason why they were developed were to celebrate the beauty, for example, of nature, and I think that these moments can be really powerful to develop a relation again to an environment such as the ocean that we have lost touch with to a certain extent. And to develop a ritual with or for an octopus or for a fish is actually what you're doing.
Well, I just draw.
Well, yeah.
No. Yeah, well, I mean, ritual, what does that mean? It means actions, repetitive actions, and certain... I studied ritual of other cultures, but I wanted to translate it into my own ritual in New York, very... and I thought of my early performances as rituals for my audience there, but they weren't, we could use the word spiritual. That probably comes into it. I don't like to describe my work that way, but it has something to do with ritual, for sure. Especially a Tibetan, a simple ritual that I saw, it's called the Black Hat Ceremony, practiced by the Nyingma, I think, a certain sect, Tibetan sect. And I went to several of those ceremonies in New York, outdoor, on the docks, and all it involves is the karmapa sitting there, and there's a big box here, and they're playing these incredible Tibetan horns, this incredible sound. They take the hat out of the box, and I think they put it, and this is probably wrong, maybe somebody, put the hat on the karmapa, take the hat off and put it back in the box. It's called the black hat ceremony. But it impressed me, this incredibly simple action. You know, it means a lot to the people who know what it means. But to somebody like me, who didn't know all the background, it was very impressive that this simple gesture can be a ritual. So that's how I related to ritual when I began. It didn't have meaning. I don't like the word symbolic. There's no symbols in my work, because symbols would pin it down too much. I expect the audience to discover it on their own and to whatever they bring to it, because you can never control how the audience is going. You know, you try as hard as you can to communicate certain things, to have certain things look a certain way, and you want the audience to see certain things, but you cannot control how they perceive it. So, anyway.
Well, yeah, there's some elements in the piece, such as the Assyrian coin of the goddess or mermaid, other goddess. And so you combine figures such as this, not symbols, let's call them figures, with the fish that you draw yourself, but also with some scientific findings or material that people like David Gruber have given to you. So I find this relationship between the mythological and the scientific extremely interesting, and how you manage to combine those two sides.
Well, I really believe that we have some in our DNA memory of the sea, of being in the sea. And I think the mermaid myth comes from that memory, that people, for many reasons, I mean, not just that, but they remembered that we came from the sea, but not consciously. But the mermaid myth, I found it on the internet, frankly. Atargatis was supposed to be the first mermaid, probably not the first, but a Syrian mermaid. And it describes her as a goddess, and she had a pool with fish swimming in it, and they had jewels embedded in them. But anyway, but you could pet the fish. And then I find out later that you do pet fish. So I think these myths somehow describe real situations. I think mythology, in many ways, I was first influenced actually by James Joyce. That's when I first started using myth in my work. The myth of Sisyphus, and he fell from the sky. Yeah. Anyway, in Portrait of the Artist, I'm sorry, I haven't thought about this.
He was the one who pushed up the...
The one who flew too close to the sun.
Icarus, yeah.
Icarus, that's right. In the Portrait of the Artist, the myth represents something of the character's ambitions or feelings or actions. And that's the way I see myth playing a part. And every painting in the world in history, has a relationship to storytelling and myth. So when I started thinking about how am I going to deal with the oceans, it's how do you start? I thought of starting with myth, so that's why.
Mm-hmm. And there's also these maps, for example, where you see certain sea creatures and monsters from the 14th, 15th, 16th century that represent a myth or a warning to sailors, but also call to people and say, okay, look, explore this area. So there's both this sort of threat, but also this enticement or fascination. And a lot of this stuff today we would look at and we would say, okay, this creature, this monster mermaid does not live in the ocean. But people actually believed in that. And in a lot of cases, there's a certain factual quality to those drawings as well, or to these maps. So for example, the Malmström in northern Norway, Lofoten Islands, and the kind of monsters that were thought to live there actually were a warning, because ships did disappear in that area.
No, well, I think that there's a book by, about Moby Dick. There's a real true story about, I can't read Moby Dick anymore. I read it once, a long time ago, and then I reread it I did a course at MIT about 10 years ago about the oceans, and we had to read Moby Dick. And it's a very brutal book because it's about oil, hunting oil, only hunting live creatures, and it's very upsetting, and I can't read it anymore, although I quote it in my piece. But there's a story of a whale apparently just getting really mad and ramming into a big boat and sinking it. So the whales knew what was going on, and that did happen. But yeah, you can understand people's fear of this unknown, deep place where ships were lost and they didn't understand how to navigate it and so on. And there were many, I'm sure there are many creatures that have gone, that are extinct, like the dinosaurs. So these myths just kind of stay alive and come down word of mouth.
What was your conversation like with David Gruber, who comes from a scientific field, and you are so influenced by myths? So what was it like to work with a scientist and have conversations about your respective work?
Well, he's a very open and, I mean, you always think a scientist doesn't believe in myth, but David's very open and accepts. There's a wonderful scene in my work, because he shot it, of my dog, Ozu. When David came to visit me in Canada, he took his GoPro and was in the my dog. He played with my dog, and my dog was having a wonderful time. You'll see it when you see. That's David's shot, actually. David's just another very, very bright, informed person, and mostly our communication was, "Oh, let me see what you have." And he showed me footage that he had. And, I mean, he told me stories about, I think scientists a lot of scientists are very aware of what's going on, of course, more than we are. And it's, on one level, sad for them, because they see, I mean, the man who recorded the first whale calls, you remember the ones in the, that first came out in the 60s? That's another kind of whale. The whale calls here, the sperm whale, but the other whale, I can't remember which whale it is, was recorded by a man who's still alive. That
Humpback whale, probably.
What?
The humpback whale, probably?
Maybe humpback, yes, humpback whale, who's still alive, and David knows him. And this man is just heartbroken, you know what I mean, about the ocean. So scientists get very close in feeling to the creatures that they're working with. And so David was just very open and easy to talk to about. I didn't talk to him about the piece itself, but he was very generous. And at one point, I think he gave me more than he thought he gave me, because he left his hard drive with me, so I really plundered it. But, I mean, his footage, I think, you know, it's one of the underlying strengths of the piece, to show all those little electric lights underwater, and he and the children, I have to say, if I look at this version.
And you told me that you're interested in his particular work, in David's work, because he works with perception and fish perception. So he develops these cameras that simulate the way that fish perceive underwater. And I mean, in order to do that, you of course have to have a certain, I mean, you have to be quite imaginative and, you know, speculative.
Well, he's actually, David is, I think it's nice. He doesn't want to be an artist. Not everybody should be artists. But he works with cameras, and he has an incredible eye, and he shoots beautiful pictures. So in a way, he's very close. I think some scientists are very close to being artists, because they have the same methodology of research, discovery, experimentation. And that's how David and I communicated. I mean, I was attracted to him, first of all. I met him at a convening by TBA21. I have to say it's nice. TBA21 does not put people together. But I met him, and I did some research about what he did, and he works with how fish see and perceive. So he's developed cameras and lenses to photograph the biofluorescent fish, which you see in my piece. And now he's on to something else. He's working with whales.
Can you talk a bit about the children in the piece? So they were both in the Venice Pavilion. They come to us without a word, and now they're featured again in this installation some years later. Why do you work with them?
Well, for Venice, it was a double meaning. I wanted to, I was supposed to represent America, the U.S., and I wanted there to be certain presences in the piece. So I asked, these are all children of a friend of mine. And so that's why, one of the reasons I asked them to be in that piece, in the videos, and also the other, and they were also in the performance of They Come to Us Without a Word. But then I also wanted children, because I was talking about bees, extinct, fish, whatever, all these situations which wildlife is in trouble. And then onto this piece for the same reason. I wanted children, the children are going to inherit our world, and I wanted them to be a presence, a major presence in the piece as performers. And so in the piece in Venice, they're all children of friends of mine in New York. And in Venice, the children simply performed. They didn't speak. They weren't really ready to. But then when I was working on this piece in New York and working on the installation, when the children came to my play, I suddenly thought they have to speak, you know. They have to be the ones. So they say a lot of the things that I say in the, and more, in the performance, because they're not in the performance live. And so they represent a presence. We're giving them this world. You know, they're going to inherit it. It's pretty grim, I have to say. I hate to say that, but that I do not express that in the performance or in the installation. But, and I don't ever say anything like that to the children. But they know, because they learn about it in school. They know what's going on. So I wanted the children, for that reason, simply said.
I mean, they're just presence, but they also take on a certain role of reading all of these sort of, you know.
But now I'm simply interested in them as performers also. I think my next piece, I'm going to ask the same children to come back. You know, they get older every time they're 3 years older. And that also interests me to kind of keep bringing them back. And they've gotten better. One of them wants to be an actress, Zora. She wants to be an actress, so it's interesting. And then they have a different relationship to what I give them to do. Anyway, children are great to work with. As long as you don't make them cute.
Maybe one last question from me before we can open up to the audience. So somebody asked me today, is the exhibition, is it about a celebration of beauty of the ocean, or is it about a political message? What's your answer?
I think it's both, but the political message is not overt. It's just in the material. I don't wish to make an overt statement. It's about the beauty, but it's also about, I think that, I mention things in the performance. I say, half the world's wildlife, we've killed, half the world's wildlife are gone. Half the world's fish, gone. So I say things like that, but it's just, it's a thread running through. It's not a major, it's not really the major part of it, but I think it's implied because we know what's happening and how difficult it is to do anything about it. Like, for instance, the footage that Francesca shot is behind the Jamaican fishermen talking. When I got to Jamaica, it was very stormy and we couldn't go out in the water. So I thought, well, get the Jamaican fishermen together, which Francesca knows them, and they all came over. And I recorded them. We asked them questions and recorded them, so their voices are here. And I thought it was also important for the Jamaican voices to be in the piece, because Jamaica, the language is so beautiful, the way people speak and sound, and I wanted that to be part of the piece, that's why. And so Francesca shot that footage that the Jamaicans are speaking against, and yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also what we need today, are these kinds of messages that are, of course, realistic and a warning, but also give hope, or...
But, yeah, because also in Jamaica, the fishermen are talking about having an area to stop fishing. So certain things can be done, but we're fighting against enormous odds. So, but it's better to be doing something and to be positive about doing something.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
You have to insist.
There is one. I think there's a microphone coming.
Joan, thank you for this wonderful speech. My question is all about consciousness. I think the big difference between the people that understand the planet and the environment is because they're conscious and they're aware and they have that special sensibility that makes them respect the rest of the human world. My question to you is, how do you expect with your piece and with your work to alter and to enhance the consciousness of people that see it? Because I think that for me that's an elevated sense of consciousness is really what makes people respect the other beings that we share this planet with. So it's just a simple question, is with your work, how would you expect people to, or is that the only way, through the work of an artist, or do you see any other ways for us to enhance our consciousness?
I think everybody should be talking about it all the time. No, relatively speaking, I can do very little. But I can, I know that people, when they see my piece, a lot of people say I'm not going to eat fish anymore, or those are very small things. I don't really, well, what can I say? It's very difficult to say. How do I don't really think of myself as somebody who changes people's consciousness. I hope that my work affects people. And if I thought about, I think I would become too self-conscious to think about changing people's consciousness. But I certainly hope that people are affected by my work, by the work, the way I'm affected by other people's work. But I do think that somebody like this girl, Greta, it's important that we have more people like that, because it's not just artists who are working and trying to alter things. It should be many more young people. You know, if I was really wanting to change people's consciousness, seriously, what you're talking about, I'd be going and giving lectures in schools and really doing a lot more things like that. I think that's what people should be doing, talking to. I mean, they're just eliminating plastic bags in New York. You know, what does that mean? It's very little. It's something. I think people realize a little bit by seeing my work, but I don't know, because very few people come up to me and say things, really. I mean, very few people say, a few people say, oh, I didn't know that we came from the sea, or I'm going to give up fish, or they say other things too that are complimentary, but changing people's consciousness. I mean, I think that's what artists are doing continuously, but without talking about it.
Gracias.
There's also the saying by, I think it was Martha Rosler, who said, artists don't change the world, activists change the world. But I think we can all contribute, of course, to, you know, changing consciousness and doing our little bit.
Hello. I have a very small question regarding your drawings. I would like to, as I understand, you draw by attaching a brush to a stick. I would like to know why you like to draw in this way, like with a 1 meter stick attached to the brush. Thank you.
Well, I'll just mention somebody who did it a long time ago, Matisse, did that because he was making drawings on the wall. But, you know, that's not why I did it. I'm just mentioning, you know, a male backup character. But, yeah, I like to draw with different instruments and different, use the different devices from the very beginning. Whenever I decide to make a drawing, I think, how can I give myself a handicap? How can I make a new situation? Drawing with a stick is very, very basic, actually. It extends your arm, and you can draw in a different way. You know, drawing is either this with your fingers on a little piece of paper, or it's this, you know? And if you have a drawing with a stick, you could make a big, I make very big drawings sometimes in performances, and I call it indirect drawing also. I use it drawing on the wall with a stick, because I can stand a certain amount of distance away. I mean, I do make drawings in my studio on the table and on the wall like that, but something else happens if I draw with a stick. So I'm interested in what happens when you draw in different ways with different devices. Something else happens. And also, it's something that many people have been doing.
Hello. Have you did you talk about the children in your performances? I would like to know what is the response, the reaction during the years. Thank you.
The response of what?
The response to the...
The reaction, because you told about they talk to you in their performances.
You mean the children's reaction?
Yes, the children reaction.
Mm-hmm.
The children, the only thing I did in relation to trying to tell them something, we had a beekeeper come and give a lecture to the children when we were working on the piece. And they found it interesting, but then they didn't want to talk about it. And the children would come to my studio, and it's a job. You know, they'd have very little time. Children have a short attention span as far as this kind of work goes. They come to my studio for a few hours on Saturday, very hard to get them, and they'd come and it's a job that they had to do. We had to, working with the children in relation to these projections, I have a whole crew filming them, and it's a time situation. So I didn't attempt to sit around and talk to the children. I did not want to draw the children into talking about the subject, frankly, because I think that they can do that at school with their parents. I didn't feel that it was my job. The children, they were much more involved with, the other child. Like when I did the piece in Venice, the two little boys, Jason's twin boys, they were about, I don't know, how old were they then? They were 8 or 9. Anyway, they were always restless and everything, and there was an older boy who was like 14, and so I put them all together on one side of the stage, so the older boy could, kind of calm them down. And so that's what you have to, it's about kind of entertaining them and keeping them calm and interested and focused. And they like doing it, but it's not their main interest. They're interested in so many different things. So working with the children was not about teaching them. On the other hand, I think that they enjoy being in my performances, and they're very incredibly sweet. I have a relationship to them. And so I keep it at that level. I don't know if that answers the questions. Oh, one of them, Willa, who's the blonde, came and spent 2 weeks with me last summer in Canada because she wanted to just be with me and work with video. So that happens too, that I have, which I like. I don't have children of my own. So I really enjoy having that relationship with children. But I'm not trying to enlighten them about this particular one subject.
I think, Francesca, you wanted to say something?
Questions? Does nobody else have a question? No, so I just want to thank
There's somebody back there.
There is.
Just one more question. What time is it? Oh, it's
7:10.
I just want to come back again to the drawings that you do in your studio. What is the role of the drawings? Is this because it seems to be like repeating always the same, like fish? Is this
What's the question?
No, I try to do the question. Is it this kind of ritual what you talked about, like repeating the same content of drawings all the time, or is it a preparation for your performances, or what is the role of the drawing in the studio?
Drawing I like to draw, and I'll tell you, as far as the idea of ritual, it's not a ritual, it's an action with particular, I have to practice it. If I draw in public, I have to practice it over and over again. And I get obsessed with certain images. I drew my last dog. I made many drawings of a dog named Zena and of Sappho. I get obsessed with certain images. I think a lot of artists get obsessed with certain images, and they do these things. They do them over and over again. And so now I've been drawing fish over and over again. I have to stop pretty soon. But I think I'll keep drawing fish because there's so many different ways to draw it. So I like to experiment, and I just enjoy the action. But the drawings have a certain, in the performance, the drawing has a function. It emphasizes an aspect of the subject, and it's an action. I always do it's an action. I'm not a dancer, although if anybody's a dancer, I am, because anybody can be a dancer. But I use movement in my work, and drawing is part of the movement and part of the language of the whole picture. I think that's it.
I actually wanted to say one little thing that we haven't talked about just briefly, and that is that many years ago when I learned to swim, my mother, who's here tonight, taught me how to swim. And she taught me how to look under the water. She bought me a little goggles when I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And I learned to swim and snorkel in a place called Alligator Head in Jamaica, in East Portland. And many years later, I took my children and did exactly the same thing in the same place, in our family home there. And there were no fish on the reef anymore. And that was the most heartbreaking thing, that I couldn't share with them that excitement that I had seeing these tropical fish swim around me and my mother that were totally unafraid of us. And that led to the creation of the Alligator Head Foundation and a fish sanctuary that covers 6 miles of Jamaican coastline. So whilst I have endeavored as a philanthropic person to support in the arts in many different ways, I've also, together with Marcus Raymond, created a conservation site in Jamaica, a fish sanctuary. And we're very, very proud that Joan came and spent so much time there and actually participated in that, engaged with the fishermen. This meant so much to us. And I'm very happy to say that after 3 years of this fish sanctuary being in place, we have already 250% increase of fish biomass and different species returning to our reef. And this is the most extraordinary thing, to see lobsters crawling all over the grounds where I thought I'd never see a lobster again. So I just wanted to say thank you for mentioning that some of this footage I made, but I am really very proud of this project. And it is important not to just talk about changing the ocean, illustrating it and creating an incredible emotional impression of it, like the work Joan has created, but also to get on with the hard job of fish conservation in the Caribbean. So I just want to say thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for hearing us all. But if there's one person I've forgotten to thank, and I do this all the time, and it's especially having said that these two teams have now become one, that's really due to one person, and that's Carlos Uros. So